Ian's got an awful lot to share with you, so I will cut this short and just say he has been one of the best campaigners for truth in every sense of the word for a very, very long time. And I know that what he's going to present for you today is very powerful. So please give a huge hand for Mr. Ian R. Crane.
Breaking news on News Corp. The media conglomerate is shutting down its News of the World UK tabloid.
At this hour, we really don't know just how far-reaching the scandal that rocked Rupert Murdoch's media empire will be.
Inspired casting, and thanks to Lisa and John for letting me use that as my intro this year. An inspired decision as well to shut down the News of the World in a heartbeat. It had to be shut down because by shutting the paper down literally by the next issue, the only thing that had to be kept were the financial records. So from the moment that the paper was put to bed on Sunday, July 10th, everything else, the phones, the computers, any hard copy of anything would have been trashed. What's going on here? It's still unfolding. But of course, phone hacking is nothing new. I'm sure many people can remember back, 12 years now? Prince Charles, Camilla Parker Bowles, and a tampon because of phone hacking. But all of a sudden, it's a big deal. And it's a big deal for exactly the same reason as the MP's expenses were a big deal 2 years ago. It's to keep other stuff off of the front pages. A distraction indeed. But nonetheless, what we're also seeing is and we're going to go through this presentation, we'll see that there is an increasing amount of evidence that there is a lot of infighting between the various factions of those who think they are the rightful rulers of the planet. And as already has been introduced, Sean Hoare, of course, paid the price, found dead in his apartment in North London on Monday of last week. July the 18th. It is believed that he died on July the 17th, 8 years to the day since the death of this guy. This guy died on July the 17th, was found on July the 18th. Sean Hoare died on July the 17th, found on July the 18th. I doubt there'll be any investigation or any hearing into Sean Hoare's death, but it wouldn't really matter anyway, would it? Because we all know the result. But we also all know the truth, and the two don't exactly correlate. Of course, we're also seeing these guys, and when I was watching Mick Hucknall give evidence in Parliament the other day, I actually turned the sound down because you can get a lot more sometimes from just watching the body language. And Mick was lying through his proverbial teeth. But there's a speaker who has been at the Glastonbury Symposium before who really picked up on what's going on here. And this was the headline in the Daily Mail a couple of days ago. The real scandal MPs ignore as the Murdoch grilling turns to farce. Bankers get $14 billion pound bonuses because they did exactly what they were asked to do. They got bonuses for the same reason anybody gets a bonus from their employer. They achieved all their goals and objectives, and these guys, of course, did it in spades. So they get the bonuses, but we don't really want that on the front pages because people might get a little bit pissed off. So let's come up with something else. So this was a good day, obviously, to bury bad news. And, of course, we have the IMF warning of the meltdown. Well, the guy who picked that up was a previous speaker at the symposium here, Christopher Booker. And he said the euro now threatens the world with economic meltdown. Well, it's not just the euro, of course, it's the US dollar as well. because August the 2nd is crunch date in the US. They've already passed one debt ceiling at, was it $14.2 trillion. A new one was set for August the 2nd, and we're about to go through that. But Christopher absolutely nailed it here. He said, whilst Britain has seemingly been transfixed by Murdoch Gate, rolling down on us all like a tsunami, interesting choice of word, is a crisis so immeasurably greater that by comparison it makes the misdemeanors of a few journalists, policemen and politicians look quite irrelevant. And this was exactly the case with the MP's expenses 2 years ago. I mean, in the scheme of things, whilst I'm not condoning, obviously, the corruption, the reality was that that was a scandal that had been basically about 8 years in the making, because they had deliberately set the MPs up. They were encouraged to milk the expenses regime. And it was done deliberately so that on the due date, whenever that may be, the rug could be pulled and it could be a massive scandal. In the scheme of things, it was barely £1 million, but it would be enough to take everything else off the front pages. And of course, it did exactly that. And it meant that there was absolutely no debate in the British media about power moving over to Brussels during the run-up to the British elections. Brilliant. But all this, as we're seeing, and as Andy has already acknowledged, it is interesting how every year there's a theme that runs through the symposium without any collusion between the speakers. And this year, of course, is absolutely no different. So the title that I had selected for this particular presentation is The Shift is About to Hit the Fan. And as you're going to see, the shift has already started to hit the fan in a big way, but it's going to speed up. And this is exactly what I presented on this stage 5 years ago, July 2006, in a presentation that I gave called Hidden Agenda 2012, where I said that in the last 24 months, prior to December 21st, 2012, we would see the geopolitical agenda speed up to the point where the vast majority of people would not be able to keep pace with it. And in the course of preparing this presentation, it's really been a question of what do I leave out? Because a few years ago, it was really pretty clear what I was going to talk about. There was one or two issues. But now, as you're going to see, there's a lot that I'm going to talk about. There's a lot I'm going to leave out. A year ago, I was talking about the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster. And my observation, based on my 20 years in the oil industry, working with a company called Schlumberger, that it was a contrived event. Now, that DVD of that presentation has been available on Amazon since September of last year. Amazon managed to bury it, so that even if you put Ian Crane, BP, into Amazon's own search engine, you couldn't find the DVD. It took me until February to eventually get Amazon to hook it into their search engine so that it could be found. Well, the reason it's been buried, of course, is because part of that presentation was that I actually identified the individual that was put on the rig to make it happen. And I explained how he was put on the rig, how he made it happen, and, basically, obviously, if I'm wrong, BP and the individual concerned should be suing me for libel. It wasn't either of these guys, by the way. Ronald Sepulvado was the very experienced BP company man that was moved from the rig on April the 16th, and he was replaced by this guy, Bob Kaluza, a very inexperienced BP company man. And in this presentation a year ago, I made the observation that BP had removed all photographs of the two company men on the rig at the time the well blew, Bob Kaluza and Donald Verdreen. And you cannot find anything about Bob Kaluza on the web. So, this should be your first clue. So BP are literally hoping that no attention is drawn to Bob Kaluza. Now, one of my fellow researchers in the US has set up a Facebook page trying to raise awareness of the significance of Bob Kaluza, but people in the Gulf Coast have got many, many other issues that they need to be focused on. And since the presentation a year ago, I came across a piece of video footage from the hearing in the Senate, which is prima facie evidence that the US is a corporatist state. And of course, corporatist state is another way of saying fascist state. So let me just show you this clip. This actually occurred about 3 weeks before the symposium last year, but I hadn't seen it by then. But this is very, very important.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged of S-3462, a bill to provide subpoena power to the National Commission on the British Petroleum Oil Spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and that the Senate then proceed to its consideration.
Is there objection?
On behalf of other members of the Republican conference, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President?
Senator from New Hampshire.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 442 H.R. 5481, a bill to give subpoena power to the National Commission on the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill and offshore drilling, that the bill be read a third time and passed, and the motion to consider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. This is legislation that passed the House 420 to 1.
Is there objection?
On behalf of other members of the Republican conference, I object.
The objection is heard.
Madam President,
The Senator from New Hampshire.
I don't understand what is so objectionable. In the House, 169 Republicans voted in favor of giving the Presidential Commission subpoena power. They understand how important that is, because this commission begins their investigation in the next few weeks. This should not be a partisan issue. I don't understand why my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are turning this into a partisan issue. I find it unbelievable that after everything the people of the Gulf region have endured and that this entire country has witnessed for over 2 months now, that anyone is still standing with the oil company that caused this disaster instead of the victims who are suffering from it.
I hope the American people understand that this is a clear contrast between who stands on your side and who stands on the side of special interests. How is it possible that members of this chamber find it difficult when the House of Representatives, in a near unanimous vote, could say that the subpoena power is necessary for the Commission to be able to get to the bottom of what happened, could pass unanimously there, save for one vote, and yet cannot even proceed here? Cannot even proceed here. This isn't rocket science. It's common sense to most Americans. We need to fully learn the lessons of this disaster with a thorough investigation, not protect oil companies from having their negligence exposed. We need to get answers from BP and Transocean and Halliburton and everyone else, including the federal agencies, not give apologies to them, as I have seen Republicans suggest that we should apologize to BP for making sure that the residents of the Gulf region are held whole. We need to know the truth, and the Commission needs subpoena power to get the truth. So who are you protecting, and what are we hiding here?
What this is, it is the Senate. And what you saw there was one of the members of the Senate asking the Senate to give the BP hearing, the Gulf Coast hearing, the presidential hearing, the power of subpoena, to demand that the likes of Bob Kaluza and Donald Verdreen turn up to give their evidence, because Bob Kaluza has pleaded the Fifth Amendment, which means that any evidence he may give may be self-incriminating. So he has elected not to appear. Donald Verdreen has declared himself to be sick and unable to give evidence. So neither of these individuals, Bob Kaluza or Donald Verdreen, have given evidence to the Gulf Coast hearing and never will. Because in this Senate vote, the Republican Party shut down and blocked the power of subpoena to the Gulf Coast hearing, thereby preventing the Gulf Coast hearing from ever establishing the truth behind what really occurred on the BP Deepwater Horizon. Okay, I showed this slide last year because a particular individual had made the recommendation on US TV that one of the ways in which perhaps the BP well could be shut down was by nuking it. Now, this is completely outrageous. It had only ever been done once before in Russia. in, I think it was 1973, with a gas well, and they're still paying the price to this day. So I made the observation last year that this was completely outrageous, and thankfully, it wasn't followed up. But the guy who made this recommendation was a guy called Matthew Simmons. Now, Matthew Simmons and I haven't exactly seen eye to eye over the years, because Matthew Simmons is was one of the prime movers behind the whole peak oil hypothesis. But in 2008, when the price of oil went up to $147 and then quickly dived, I think Matthew Simmons realized that the whole peak oil construct was nothing more than a sort of political maneuver to raise the prices of oil. So Matt Simmons actually left the oil industry, left investment banking, and set up his own company, a company called Ocean Energy Institute. And the prime purpose of Ocean Energy Institute was to set up wind farms off the coast of Maine. And his goal was to have Maine's electricity all generated from wind by the year 2020. On the day that I was giving this presentation last year, the Gulf of Mexico had been cleared of all shipping because there was a tropical storm supposedly on its way. And before any of the shipping could be returned to the Gulf, BP announced that they'd managed to cap the well. Well, Matthew Simmons actually came up with something very, very interesting. Matt spotted that the live feed from the camera, the underwater camera, had changed. Prior to the shipping being cleared, the Lambda coordinates, which is effectively the underwater GPS coordinates of the well, this is the well that was spewing oil, had changed. And they were no longer these coordinates. Sorry, it's the other way around. This is the well that was spewing oil, and these were the coordinates that were on the camera prior to July 23rd. But afterwards, the camera was supposedly showing a well that had stopped spewing oil, but the coordinates had changed. So Matt Simmons went on US television and said, look, another lie from BP, another lie from the federal government. They haven't shut this well down. It's still spewing oil. And he was extremely vocal on this particular issue for about 2 weeks, because then, tragically, he was in his hot tub, 67 years of age, no history of ill health, and he was sitting in his hot tub in Maine, and he was found by his family, and he supposedly had a heart attack. So consequently, one of the most vociferous critics of BP and the federal government in the US with an oil industry background was no longer a problem. Matt Simmons made the observation that this Gulf of Mexico disaster was indeed a population reduction event, which of course is exactly the same observation I made, and the title of the DVD from last year is BP, Population Reduction and the End of an Age. Well, it gets worse.
The plume is actually disappearing. The plume is being biodegraded, that there is a new form of microbiology that is attacking this plume and using it as a food source.
Just to bring it back to the...
Okay, sorry. Tight schedule here.
Okay, thank you.
That's Mike Utzler in the green shirt there. He's the Chief Operating Officer with BP. And what he's saying to Stephen Fry there, which I think was for a Channel 4 or BBC documentary that was broadcast last year, what he was making the observation to Stephen Fry was he said, we, BP, have introduced genetically modified microbiology as part of the cleanup operation. So now what you've got is a soup, a toxic soup of oil, Corexit, which is extremely toxic as a dispersant. It's 10 times more toxic than oil. It was used to submerge the slick, coupled with microbiology, genetically modified microbiology. There are researchers in the Gulf of Mexico who have nicknamed the illness that is manifesting there blue plague, BP, blue plague. And this is attacking people. It is reached the point of horizontal gene transfer. It's moving now across species. It's a real problem. And anybody who starts to shout about it is a beneficiary of BP's behavioral health payments. As of April, BP had paid out $62 million in behavioral health payments. This is a euphemism for keeping people quiet. So as soon as anybody starts to raise concerns about their health or the health of a family member, BP immediately comes in and basically says, how much do you want? And then they sign a clause which Basically, it means that they have to keep any payment confidential and any future symptoms that they display confidential. Well, we're starting to see the same symptoms elsewhere in the US right now. And this was recently, it's not a particularly good photograph because this was a guy driving along in Missouri when one of these monster storms hit Missouri, leaving a phenomenal trail of devastation. And we are seeing, and although it's being suppressed by the mainstream media, of course, we are seeing the same symptoms in Missouri now as we have seen in the Gulf Coast over the last 12 months or so. And of course, the hypothesis is that the toxic soup from the Gulf is being lifted up into the Gulf Stream and then is obviously moving with the Gulf Stream and then coming down in the rainfall and in the storms here. So we're starting to see the spread of the toxic soup from the Gulf of Mexico. But you're not going to read too much about it unless you actually go search for the BP activist community. I'm going to move on because I'm going to cover a bunch of events that have occurred, and I'm going to leave a lot out. Let's move on to the tsunami in Japan. Because what I discovered in the immediate aftermath of the tsunami was that there was a young lad in Australia who had absolutely pinpointed this to the hour. A young lad called Mitchell Coombs. And here's the proof, because this is from Facebook, okay? This is one entry. Mitchell Coombs, okay, everyone, you've been warned of what's to come. We now have 104 hours to go. Hold on tight, we are in for the shock of your lives. And that was posted on March the 7th, 4 days before the tsunami hit. On March the 11th at 10:20 in Australian time, so before it hit, Mitchell Coombs wrote, so what a great start to the year. Queensland, worst floods in history. Queensland's worst cyclone in history. New Zealand's worst earthquake in its history. A 6.6 earthquake in China on Wednesday. Tsunami in Japan later tonight. What's next on the agenda? And then he posted, I was correct to the exact hour once again. Just like with the New Zealand earthquake, Cyclone Yasay and the Queensland floods, you were all warned well in advance. If you didn't watch his videos, I posted about the Pacific tsunami, that's your own fault. The reason being because he was getting a lot of grief. That's why he got a little bit aggressive with some of these posts, because he was getting a lot of grief from people going, how the hell did you know? And of course, accusing him of having some inside knowledge. Well, what he claimed was that he had been studying this game, the Illuminati cards, which is a card game that was produced by Steve Jackson of Austin, Texas, back in the early 90s. Now, I don't have the time to go into the history of this game, but Steve Jackson remarkably seems to have hit the nail on the head with some of these cards, because this is the morass of cards. You can still get versions of the game, although some of the original cards have now been changed, because each time an event occurs, which was shown on the cards, he takes the card out of circulation. But take a look at this. This was pre-9/11, in the Illuminati cards pre-9/11. This looks remarkably like the Twin Towers, and this looks remarkably like the Pentagon. Now, I had been aware of the Illuminati cards up until this point, but not really followed it with any sort of real great fervor. But now I started to take a look. And then I looked at a more recent set and found this one for the Pentagon. And this is real interesting because this has got an Air Force captain here with something sort of obviously going on in the middle of the Pentagon here. Well, a year before 9/11, there was an exercise, and the exercise was based on a plane crashing into the courtyard of the Pentagon. And that was on October the 24th to 26th, 2007. The scriptwriter for this particular exercise was a US pilot. He was working with American Airlines. And prior to that, he'd been in the US Air Force. I think he was a fighter pilot. But because of his military background, he was used by the Pentagon from time to time as a consultant to write these exercises. This pilot's name was Chuck Burlingame, and he was the pilot of Flight 77, allegedly, that flew into the Pentagon 1 year later. His daughter never believed it, by the way, but she died under mysterious circumstances in a fire in 2006. The cards, this is one of the cards from the original set, the oil spill. That's a photograph that a friend of mine sent me from the Gulf Coast. And the flesh-eating bacteria. Well, we've known of Vibrio vulnificus, which was certainly causing some problems back in September and October of last year. Fortunately, the problems seem to have dissipated somewhat, but nonetheless, we had a problem with flesh-eating bacteria in the Gulf Coast. Hopefully, it's not going to get worse now that we've got genetically modified microbiology in the Gulf with it. But let's take a look at what Mitchell Coombs was looking at, because he saw these cards: the early warning, the earthquake projector, otherwise known as HAARP, the tidal wave, and with a nuclear accident, and a combined disasters card. And the combined disasters card. And it was the combined disasters card that Mitchell Coombs claimed gave him the unique insight into the coming tsunami and where it was going to attack. Because this particular clock face here, and look at the clock, there it is, and look at when it's set to. It's actually, it looks like it's set to 11:11, interestingly enough. But Mitchell said that he took that to read 3:11. He took that to read 3:11. Well, that is the Waco clock tower in Tokyo. And that's what Mitchell claimed gave him the insight to be comfortable to predict the coming tsunami. But the tsunami, of course, was only a part of it, because as you saw in the combined disasters card, it covers the nuclear accident. So we have the earthquake, tidal wave, nuclear accident. And then from some research by a gentleman by the name of Jim Stone, we have to question the veracity of the story that we've been told about the nuclear reactor, and I understand that somebody actually mentioned this in the forum last night. First of all, Jim Stone has looked at the evidence to try and prove that there was indeed a 9.0 earthquake on the east coast of Japan at that time, and he can't find any evidence for that. There's also some evidence to suggest that the meltdown of Fukushima, which, by the way, was supposed to be decommissioned on March the 19th, but the meltdown of Fukushima actually started before the tsunami hit it. So what could have triggered that? Well, the Israeli security company that had the contract for the security of Fukushima had installed a whole bunch of cameras inside the chamber here. This is the explosion of Fukushima. This is one of the cameras that the Israelis had installed. And Jim's hypothesis is that, consider the possibility that this had actually been converted into a limited nuclear device, which effectively blew the reactor. And this is the signature of a nuclear test. Now, this also may give us a clue as to what happened on 9/11. Because if that was the case, then this could have destroyed everything that was inside the towers, and then a traditional controlled demolition destroyed what was on the outside. There we go. So just superimpose in your mind, superimpose one of the World Trade Centers over that. And you start to see maybe what perhaps occurred. Now, literally, hot on the heels of the Fukushima disaster, Germany, Angela Merkel announced that she was going to shut down all of Germany's nuclear reactors that were operational before 1980. And then a few days after that, she announced that there was a plan to shut down all of Germany's nuclear reactors by 2022. So my first thought was, hang on a second, why would Angela Merkel do that? Surely Germany isn't likely to be susceptible to a tsunami. Well, here we go. To phase out nuclear power by 2022. Well, this guy, Andreas von Bülow, who was the Minister of Defense for Germany at the time of 9/11, was a very, very astute individual. And there's no question Germany has some very, very astute people within their intelligence community. And von Bülow, in the aftermath of 9/11, grounded all of the Lufthansa Boeing fleet. And they stripped out all of the computing technology, hardware and software, that had been installed by Boeing. The reason being is that Dov Zakheim, who was a signatory to the Project for New American Century document, Rebuilding America's Defenses, he was also the guy, by the way, who announced that the Pentagon couldn't account for $2.3 trillion on the day before 9/11. He was also very closely associated with a company called Systems Planning Corps, which developed the hardware and software enabling the remote control of aircraft. So consider the possibility that von Bülow considered that maybe the planes on 9/11 had been remotely hijacked and that technology could have possibly been installed in Lufthansa's Boeing fleet, and that's why they grounded the Boeing fleet. So we know that within the German intelligence community, there are some very, very astute watchers of the geopolitical agenda. This is a map of Germany's nuclear facilities. And as you can see here, I mean, they're nowhere, apart from these, they're nowhere really near the coast. So it wasn't going to be a tsunami that was the concern. So what were the German intelligence community concerned about? Well, take a look at this. Exactly 1 year before the March the 11th tsunami, nuclear explosion, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan issued a statement. And basically, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the decision of the government of Israel regarding the construction of housing units and settlements in the West Bank says the government of Japan deplores the decisions of the government of Israel to give permission for the construction of 1,600 housing units in East Jerusalem. Strike one. Strike two. Strike two. This was the vote in the UN regarding the Israeli settlements on Palestinian territory. Both Japan and Germany voted against Israel in this vote. Now, this is the first time, and this was on February the 18th of this year, this is the first time that Germany has ever voted against Israel in the United Nations. So this was certainly a landmark vote, and certainly the Israeli ambassador to Germany obviously tried to read Angela Merkel the Riot Act over it. Germany and Japan voting against Israel. A few days later, it was announced in the media that Japan had offered to enrich uranium for Iran. This was strike three. Strike three. So let's consider the possibility that what actually took down Fukushima was the Stuxnet virus, a virus developed by the CIA/Mossad, specifically to target the Siemens controllers of Iran's nuclear reactors. The reason that Angela Merkel announced that they were immediately shutting down all pre-1980 reactors was because they had the same controllers as the Iranian reactors. So somebody within the German intelligence community was obviously concerned that because of their vote and because of their track record along with Japan, that they may also be a target for the Stuxnet virus. Then, of course, having shut that one down, a few days later, we have the E. coli outbreak, which is supposedly caused by organic cucumbers. Had to be organic, because we've got to shut down the organic market so that we can bring in genetically modified foods. And, of course, Germany is actually one of the prime supporters of retaining organic farming and keeping GM products out of Europe. So once they dismissed the idea that it was cucumbers, then, of course, we went on to bean sprouts. Again, it was organic bean sprouts. But then, of course, it was discovered by the Koch Research Center in Germany that this E. coli was basically resistant to every known form of antibiotic. This could not have occurred naturally. It was indeed a bioengineered weapon. Coupled with which, of course, it also served the purpose to demonize organic food. Monsanto, of course, is a Zionist entity. It's owned by the Monsanto family, arch-Zionists. Always 9/11. We see in the paper today, and of course, what would he see? It's an Al-Qaeda massacre. Just like on 9/11, you know, we see immediately that within literally 10 minutes of the planes going into the towers, it's Al-Qaeda. And we see this again today. And of course, it's a real tragedy because, I mean, apart from the fact that fortunately it was a holiday, I gather, in Norway, so there weren't as many people in the offices as there might have been. But this was, of course, only part of the issue because what we have here is the gunman on an island. And, of course, this is what is quite remarkable. It's the rampage of the blue-eyed assassin. Well, he wasn't only blue-eyed. He was blue-eyed and blonde, apparently. So we've got a blue-eyed, blonde assassin. Now, I've lived and worked in the Middle East, and I can't remember meeting too many blue-eyed, blonde people in the Middle East. So the question being asked in The Sun, why Norway? Well, it's a very good question indeed. You know, we start off, Norway has long feared an attack by Muslim hardliners. So let's get getting it out there. It's Muslims, it's Muslims, it's Muslims. But, you know, maybe there's another reason here. Maybe it's another reason. Norway has endorsed the Palestinian statehood, just like Japan and Germany. Norway has stated that it will withdraw from the Libyan expedition, another illegal war, of course, by August the 1st. And Norway has also withdrawn investment funding from a number of Israeli firms connected with the development of West Bank settlements. Strike one, strike two, strike three. So I haven't really had too long, obviously, to research this, but I did a little bit of a web search, and I looked for blonde, blue-eyed Al-Qaeda. Blonde, blue-eyed Al-Qaeda. Well, I was shocked. I thought, oh, I'm not going to find anything on that. But no, I found a whole bunch of stuff on it.
Have you heard about this new thing going on in Great Britain that Al-Qaeda routing up all these Britons, essentially, 1,400 strong, apparently, in a new, what's being called a new white Al-Qaeda army. Tougher to detect, potentially.
Yeah, because they're not Muslims. They look just like regular British people.
They're converts.
Also, we're going to talk more about the controversial subject regarding Al-Qaeda. Are they recruiting a white army now in Great Britain? Some people say it's 1,400 people strong, and why is that important? Because this is what we've always talked about, that if you have people in one country transplanting to another religion and they maybe aren't exactly what you think they are, that can be more difficult to fight.
Yeah, they're converting them in prison to extremist
to kill us.
Muslims. Yeah, okay, great.
Okay, this is what's known as mindscaping. That's actually from 2008. And I encourage you to go Google it for yourself. You know, go Google blonde, blue-eyed Al-Qaeda. And what you'll find is a number of clips from 2008 where they started the process of mindscaping, sowing the seeds about blonde, blue-eyed Al-Qaeda operatives who are not what they seem. I mean, let's not forget that the only Al-Qaeda terror cell that has ever been arrested was actually arrested in Mexico, and they were all discovered to be stooges of the local Mossad group. On September the 10th, 2001, this appeared in the Washington Post. Mossad are ruthless and cunning, having the capability to target US forces and make it look like a Palestinian Arab act. Who said that? Well, it was an extract from the report issued by the US Army School of Advanced Military Studies. And that was posted in the Washington Times, not the Washington Post, Washington Times on September the 10th, 2001. And of course, the Israeli government and the Zionists behind the Israeli government have concocted a brilliant scam for shutting down any debate on these issues. And let's just take a look at what Shulamit Aloni had to say. She's a former Israeli minister.
Often when there is dissent expressed in the United States against policies of the Israeli government, people here are called anti-Semitic. What is your response to that as an Israeli Jew?
Well, it's a trick. We always use it. When from Europe somebody is criticizing Israel, then we bring up the Holocaust. When in this country people are criticizing Israel, then they are anti-Semitic. And the organization is strong and has a lot of money, and the ties between Israel and the American Jewish establishment are very strong, and they are strong in this country. As you know, they have power, which it's okay. They are talented people, and they have power, money, and media, and other things. And their attitude is Israel, my country, right or wrong, the identification. And they are not ready to hear criticism. And it's very easy to blame people who criticize certain acts of the Israeli government as anti-Semitics, and to bring up the Holocaust and the suffering of the Jewish people, and that justify everything we do to the Palestinians.
Israel has a major emigration problem. Many Israelis are really disturbed by the Zionist agenda. and by the inhumane treatment of the Palestinians. If you want to read more on that subject, there's a book written by a Jewish historian. He works at Exeter University. His name is Ilan Pappé, and the book is called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. Only a Jewish historian could have written that book. He's, of course, vilified by the Israeli government. The organization that she was referring to, of course, is the Anti-Defamation League and AIPAC, the America-Israel Public Affairs Committee in the US, who are incredibly powerful. I spoke at a deep geopolitics event in California last year. I was vilified by the organizers because I discussed the issue of Zionism, of dual passport holders in the American administration, and obviously the treasonous behavior of certain individuals in the American administration. And they were pretty upset that I broached these subjects. And I said, well, every other speaker has discussed the symptoms. I'm trying to get to the root cause. Let's take a look at Tripoli, onwards to Tripoli. Well, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but it's not going well, funnily enough. You know, Gaddafi had a long time to prepare for the attack, which I'm sure he believed was inevitable for many, many years, just as Iran has now. And it's not going well in the US. In fact, Obama has decreed that because it's only an air assault, it's not really war. Well, they didn't say that in 1941 when the Japanese came into Pearl Harbor, of course. But, you know, we're going to look at a few things that have occurred in the media to try and wipe these things from the front pages. And Obama, a little while ago, thought he'd nailed it on the head and could get the Libyan expedition off the front pages by releasing his birth certificate, which, of course, it took about 3.5 nanoseconds from anybody who has used Photoshop to establish that this was actually a forgery. It was in 9 layers. So this having not gone well for Obama, because it wasn't going to go away, he'd only exacerbated the problem. So now they needed something even more dramatic and outrageous to get the birth certificate issue off the front pages. And, of course, they came up with Osama bin Laden, who they decided to kill for at least a 3rd time. I mean, pretty much everybody in the US administration of George Bush believed that Osama bin Laden was dead before the end of 2001. And then, of course, Benazir Bhutto let slip in an interview with David Frost in 2007, 2009, I can't remember, where she let slip that Osama bin Laden had actually been murdered by Mohammed Sheikh Khaled. And, of course, 7 weeks later, she herself was assassinated, maybe because she had revealed an inner secret. Anyway, I have come across the real footage of what actually occurred with Osama bin Laden, and so hopefully this actually puts all conspiracies to rest.
Roger that. Target Geronimo is acquired. Over. Copy that. Yes, current location is 469.
Holy shit!
Stand by.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Back up.
So as you can see, he is dead, and it was just a tragic accident. Then we needed to get that off the front pages because obviously this whole story didn't stand up to any examination whatsoever. And so this story had only been in the US media and the European media for 2 days. For 2 days. And on the following Monday, the headline in the US media should have been, America bankrupt, IMF called in. But instead, of course, they nailed this guy. Of course, he made it easy for them because the guy is, was well known as a very aggressive sexual predator. So instead of the headlines being America bankrupt, IMF called in. Of course, the IMF is demonized, which gave them time. And, of course, they've set the new funding level to which they're due to reach on August 2nd. But I've got to tell you, the judge had a sense of humor when the judge gave him bail because, of course, he was up before the court and he was given bail conditions which were quite punitive, but one of the bail conditions was he had to live with his wife. I tell you, I think I'd have said, oh no, I'll go to jail. Anyway, we know we've got the financial meltdown, and all of these shenanigans are just aimed at sort of prolonging the agony because the bankers haven't stripped quite as much of the wealth as they really want yet. So we've got to do something fast because the final meltdown is coming very, very quickly. And a key issue, and I've been speaking about this for many months now. I did a tour with Jim Core in Ireland last November and December, talking to people about surviving the final meltdown. And if you have any kind of liquidity whatsoever, you need to think very carefully what you're going to do, because you literally maybe got a few weeks or months to do it. Because we're going to see the Eurozone do something. I mean, it just cannot continue. This blue tack and sticking plaster solutions are just not going to work. So what are you going to do? Well, in the first instance, and we've already heard reference to it during the course of the symposium, if you haven't started making some kind of provision to be able to shut your front door and pull the blinds while the shift is really hitting the fan outside, you need to start doing so. All of these buy one, get one free offers in the supermarket, you know, it needs to be buy one, stick one in the cupboard. It doesn't take long to build up a stock, but you need to start thinking about it. Food and water. And in the short term, of course, that's generally going to be cans and bottled water. In the longer term, you need to think about, obviously, growing your own food. Because if I'm wrong, and of course I hope to God I am, but even stocking up now is still going to alleviate some of the pain that's coming, because the prices of food are going to rocket as we get into the autumn. So if you start stocking up now, and there's no need for panic buying, but as you go shopping, do stock up and take advantage of this window. Now, once you've got food and water sorted out, what are you going to do with your money? Well, let's just take a look at what those who work in the financial arena do with their money. Here's the graph of gold over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, gold was at $275. This was the point at which Gordon Brown was instructed to sell 415 tons of Britain's 715 tons of gold reserves. He was instructed to sell the money by the Rothschilds to, to the Rothschilds. That's right. How could they have ever known that over 10 years, gold was going to reach $1,600? Over 10 years, the yield is 481%. Anybody buying gold at this point would have done very, very well. The property boom never existed. Never existed. Back here, you needed 363 ounces of gold to buy the average property in the UK. Today, you need 150 ounces of gold. So in real terms, property has depreciated by 60% in the UK. That's the 10-year yield. This is the 1-year yield, 33.3%, 1,200 to 1,600. Even over the last 60 days, although, you know, gold is a long-term hold. You don't go into gold for the quick buck. But over 60 days, you've still got a yield of 4.5%, which is pretty much about what you get on an annual return if your money's in the banks. But, you know, the establishment don't want people to know about gold. In fact, they'll do anything to tell you that you shouldn't go anywhere near gold. Let me show you a short clip from Ron Paul grilling Ben Bernanke.
But very quickly, if you could answer another question, because I'm curious about this. You know, the price of gold today is $1,580. The dollar during these last 3 years was devalued almost 50%. When you wake up in the morning, do you care about the price of gold?
Well, I pay attention to the price of gold, but I think it reflects a lot of things. It reflects global uncertainties. I think the reason people hold gold is as a protection against what we call tail risk, really, really bad outcomes. And to the extent that the last few years have made people more worried about the potential of a major crisis, then they have gold as a protection.
Do you think gold is money?
No.
It's not money. Even if it had been money for 6,000 years, somebody reversed that and eliminated that economic law.
Well, it's an asset. I mean, it's the same. Would you say Treasury bills are money? I don't think they're money either, but they're a financial asset.
Why do central banks hold it?
Well, it's a form of reserves.
Why don't they hold diamonds?
Well, it's tradition, long-term tradition.
You know, some people still think it's money. I yield back. My time is up.
He obviously went to the same school as Mick Hucknall. Gold is the long-term hedge. You know, back in the 1940s, it was said that one gold coin will buy you a reasonable quality suit. Today, one gold coin, a sovereign, which is about £230 worth right now, will buy you a reasonable quality suit. We're into final meltdown for a number of reasons. I don't have the time to go into that detail. It's all covered in my final meltdown DVD, but I'm going to show you a very short clip from an Irishman who sums up in about 2.5 minutes what most of us will take a little longer to explain.
I'm Jason Calabrese with the Financial News, and today we're talking to a real Irishman and someone in the money business about what's going on in Ireland with the Celtic Tiger and the banks are hurting so much, the downfall. What's the story here?
Do you really want to know?
I'd love to know.
But I'll tell you, it's like what has happened all over the Western world for the last 20 or 30 years. Greed, greed, and more fucking greed, and cheap money. And in Ireland, it's a tragedy what happened to the Tiger. We have, I'd say, 4 causes. We had a stupid fucking government. We had a regulator that was asleep at the wheel. We had very deceitful and conniving and corrupt developers. And of course, above all, wanking fucking bankers. Wanking bankers. We had these arseholes that for the last 20, 30 years are getting these massive bonuses, these employees and directors of banks, on the misfortune of the working class, and getting these huge bonuses and salaries. But, you know, if you and all these arseholes should be thrown in jail and the keys thrown away for the rest of their life. And you know, sir, if you went in and you're unemployed and you wanted to take a loaf of bread out of a store or a supermarket to feed your family, guess what? You'll be up in court for it. These assholes are living all over the world now on the backs of the misfortunate working people. And who's going to pay for all this? We've mortgaged the next generation or two. Who's going to pay for it? The working man. We got the labourer, the small farmer, the fisherman, the nurse, the teacher, the policeman, the fireman, the plumber, the carpenter. Fuck's sake, man, this is a joke.
So I'm sensing a wee bit of discontent?
You are indeed, sir. And by the way, let's not be too cocky in this part of the world, North America either. All these debts that people have accumulated over the last 30 years, hey, everybody gets their day in the sunshine.
And you know, speaking of the Celtic Tiger and all that you mentioned, you know that Michael Flatley is really from Chicago. Well, that's another story.
Fuck off!
Don't you hate it when people hold back and won't tell you what they really think? But the guy's absolutely on the money. Absolutely on the money. There was a campaign to try and identify this guy to get him to run for office in Parliament. But there's going to be a massive backlash. And I got to show you this because this is one of the Illuminati cards from the mid-90s. Who does that look like? It's incredible, isn't it? Absolutely incredible. One of the other cards is this one, the charismatic leader. And, of course, you know who's setting himself up for office in Europe? The arch socio-psychopath himself. And, of course, they're grooming him. They're grooming him. That's why he became Catholic, because the EU is a Catholic entity. If you want to see more on that, see the speech that Peter Sutherland gave to St. John's College, Oxford, on May the 15th last year, where he talks about the relationship between the Vatican and the EU. The reason that they will put this guy in there, because this guy will stop at nothing. And, of course, they're gagging for World War III. So, Mitchell Coombs. What does Mitchell Coombs have to say? Well, you'll have to go and look him up on Facebook. Because Mitchell Coombs makes a very interesting observation. He says that the next major event is scheduled for September the 11th at 11:11. Now, Mitchell's not necessarily to be dismissed. He doesn't declare this on his Facebook page, but I discovered that Mitchell is more than just a name on Facebook. He's actually the author of this book, Sensing Spirit. And he's actually quite well known within various psychic circles in Australia. And so he doesn't make a big deal about it because that wasn't something I discovered straight away. Now, what we've heard that events are speeding up at a phenomenal rate of knots, and even some of the events that I've discussed here today, I mean, probably for a lot of people, you know, they're long gone, they're history. Other things have taken over. But I want to just share this with you, because this is the comment from the report from Iron Mountain in 1967, and in that report, and the report from Iron Mountain, by the way, is the document where they talk about using things like climate change and global warming to keep people in a state of fear. But in this document it says, it has been hotly argued that a believable external menace would offer the last best hope of peace by uniting mankind against the danger of destruction by creatures from other planets or from outer space. And then they went on to say, it is more probable, in our judgment, that such a threat will have to be invented. No shit. Well, thanks. You know, I stood on this stage in 2007 and recorded a presentation called Fool Me Once, where I floated the hypothesis that they were looking to stage the fake alien invasion at the London Olympics. And there was a young lad in the audience that day who, unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to meet, although we did exchange a couple of emails almost a year later. And that was a young lad by the name of Rick Clay. And it was his presence at that presentation that set him off on his own path of discovery, which unfortunately wasn't perhaps as long as it might have been. Since that time, I've become even more convinced that they're going to focus on August the 12th, which is the closing ceremony of the London Olympics. And whether it is or it isn't the fake alien invasion, and I think it may well be, but there's no question in my mind that that is the opportunity that they're going to take to start the basic foundation for establishing the global government. And when I watched Battle Los Angeles a few weeks ago, I had to do a double take. Fortunately, I was watching it on DVD. But I had to do a double take because the opening scene, when the alien ships appear over Los Angeles in that Hollywood movie, is August the 12th, 2011. Here's a poster, by the way, from London, secure beneath the watchful eyes. And of course, it was at the symposium in 2007 that I exposed the Olympic logo as really being code for this. It is indeed Project Zion. Well, you know, there's been many people over the years who have identified that the fake alien invasion will be the last card, the last attempt to establish their global governance. And this is the book Beyond a Pale Horse by Bill Cooper, who was murdered on 6th of November 2001, not even 2 months after 9/11. But on page 177 of Beyond a Pale Horse, Bill says, can you imagine what would happen if Los Angeles is hit by a 9.0 quake, New York City is destroyed by a terrorist-planted atomic bomb, World War III breaks out in the Middle East, the banks and the stock markets collapse, extraterrestrials land on the White House lawn, food disappears from the markets, some people disappear, the Messiah presents himself to the world, all in a very short period of time. Can you imagine? The world power structure can and will, if necessary, make some or all of these things happen to bring about their new world order. An extremely prescient individual. It was also Bill Cooper, who I can attribute to coming up with the earliest reference to using the fake alien invasion as a means of establishing global governance. And it was John Dewey in 1917. He was Secretary of State for Education in the United States. Now, we also heard reference, and Andy talked about it this morning, to the coming solar storms. And those of you who were here last year will know that I recounted my experiences with the Cuero in Peru, who have nurtured this prophecy for many, many years. And they talk about the coming solar activity as being the trigger that awakens what we have been told is junk DNA, which enables us to literally completely change our perception of reality. The Cuero also invite us to visualize the type of future that we want to see, the type of future that we want to experience, as well as participate in trying to bring about those changes. But they make the observation that the critical factor is to do both, to visualize and to participate on the practical realm. But they also make the observation that we shouldn't restrict our visualization by having an existential commitment to a particular outcome, because the ultimate outcome may currently be so far beyond our bounds of comprehension or perception that if we attach too much to it, we may be limiting that process. So we are, without any shadow of doubt, at the point of the shift. Everything that's occurring right now is not sustainable. It doesn't matter how you look at the world, whether it's energy, whether it's finance, whether it's government, nothing is sustainable. So we are at this process within the alchemical experience, if you like, of solvere coagula. Now, solvere coagula suggests that we literally do have to destroy to be able to rebuild. And I think that whether or not everything has to be destroyed depends on how quickly people actually wake up to it. And what's occurring with the accelerated agenda may actually be working in our favor. Even the Murdoch scam has actually started to get people who previously weren't looking at this stuff to go, hang on a goddamn second, what's going on here? Rudolf Steiner, nearly 100 years ago, he who would create the new must be able to endure the passing of the old in full tranquility. And as I'm sure we can all recount from our experience of life, the more opportunity you have to prepare for something, the easier it is to deal with it. If you don't make any kind of effort to prepare for whatever it is that's coming, then obviously the shock may be absolutely enormous and actually may ultimately lead to, people having coronaries. And of course, the other factor is that we know that people, all the people amongst your friends and your family and your work colleagues who you've been trying to broach these subjects to for the past X number of years, when the shift really does hit the fan, of course, they're going to go, well, why didn't you tell us? We can say, why weren't you listening? Listen, the reality is, anybody who tells you they know what's coming is most likely delusional or writing the script. The reality is that we have literally got to get ourselves into the space where we can be comfortable about dealing with everything. These guys are going to try and create fear. That's the purpose, their agenda, to create fear. Iceland has done an amazing job in trying to eradicate fear by making statements such as that nobody will lose their home because of the country's economic meltdown. We haven't heard anyone else say that, have we? So, there are ways and means, but ultimately what it means is that we are going to need an absolute paradigm shift in pretty much every facet of our lives, of our thinking, and of course, the way in which we actually contribute to this. So I saw this a few days ago, and I thought that this is very apt. And I am often asked the question, Ian, where are you going to be on December the 21st, 2012? And I have a very simple response, because I don't believe it's going to matter a damn where you are. What is going to matter is who you are. Thanks very much.
Ian Ray.